Our guest today is Shane O'Donnell, who of course needs no introduction to our Irish listeners. But for those of us outside of Ireland, Shane is one of the best when it comes to our coveted national sport, hurling. Shane burst onto the scene for Clare hurlers in 2013, and just over a month ago actually, played a very, very crucial role in helping the banner claim their 5th All-Ireland title. And while Shane continues to excel in hurling, he also pursues his academic passions and professional career with equal vigour, earning a BSc in genetics and a PhD in microbiology at the University College Cork. His research has even taken him to Harvard University as a Fulbright scholar, where he explored the fascinating world of the microbiome. Shane's journey to date is a testament to what can be achieved with dedication, resilience, and an unyielding drive to be the best, whether on the hurling pitch or in his career. Today, we'll be exploring the experiences and motivations that have shaped him from his early years to his current endeavours and everything in between. Shane, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on, Podge. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited to have you on. Obviously, when I was doing my research and just from knowing you in general over the last 10 or plus years, there's loads of discussion and talk around, obviously, your hurling accolades and all you've achieved there from 2013 onwards. But I would love to just kind of get a sense, taking you back to maybe young Shane and just seeing where those passions and motivations for both hurling and your professional career that you've worked on to date. I'd love to know how that came about. So I guess my first question for you is, was there maybe someone or something inspired your drive to excel in both the areas of sport and of academia?
Yeah, I think it's probably the same for most people. I think the drive for both probably came from my family, I would say. The sporting one is probably easier. I think hurling was something my family always did, and they always would have been quite sporty anyway. But my eldest brother, I have 3 brothers. My eldest brother was like 7 years older than me, so he really blazed the path well ahead of me. He was a phenomenal hurler, and just getting to go watch him play on big occasions, like he would have won with St. Flannan's, is the secondary school we went to. He would have won the All-Ireland with St. Flannan's when I was just leaving primary school or just before that. So I'd have been maybe 10, 11. He would have been like just 17, 18. So that was a very impressionable period of anyone's life, obviously. So I see someone in my family achieving like this, and then it's just like, so that was probably where I was like, okay, I'm gonna take this seriously. I can see how serious it can get and how big a moment it is for my family and for him and everything. And that was probably a pivotal moment in the sporting kind of context. And then it was obviously like everyone, you only do the things you enjoy. So I did enjoy being part of teams and just playing with friends and all that. So yeah, that kind of just continued through my teenagers. I wouldn't say I was ever a great hurler. I would say when I was younger, especially, I was at best an average hurler, maybe an average hurler, I would say. And then maybe in the middle of my teenage years, maybe 15 or 16, just started to improve for whatever reason, started to put on a bit of weight, not particularly huge. But yeah, that all kind of culminated in starting to make kind of teams that we started win with Clare, underage and things like that. So it wasn't exactly a perfect like Peter Duggan or Tony Kelly-esque career where like you're the standout player from the moment you step onto the pitch when young lad straight through. But it was like a more slow burn of like continuing through that. So the sporting side of it is a bit clearer. Like that is kind of the trajectory of it. Early days, the career, I mean, I didn't know that I was going to end up being, I'm currently a product manager working with a company kind of tangentially connected to where my research was in microbiome. Certainly didn't know that was where I was going to end up. But I always did have like as much interest as someone can have in school. Like nobody absolutely adores school or anything, but I always would have done reasonably well in school, and my parents and family would have expected that we did quite well. So it was never like pressure being heaped on, but there was always an expectation that you would continue to progress at both things. So I wouldn't say there was any moment that I can look back on and say that really ignited a flare of interest in studying all the time or anything like that. But it was just like a slow kind of like progression of like, that was kind of what I was expected, and I was happy enough to do it.
Would your older brother have brought you outside and said, hey, standing goal there for a few shots when you were younger by any chance?
Yeah, pretty much. Me and the younger brother were cannon fodder, I would say, for the first while we were just like manning the goals while shots were being fired all over the place. But as I said, I had 3 brothers, so there was 4 of us. My dad used to play as well. So like there'd be a gang of us out in the garden all the time. And that was kind of like what our childhoods were like. So it'd be hurling or whatever sport it was. But for the most part, it was hurling. And my friends are over. It could end up being like this 4 or 5-a-side match in the garden. And that was kind of like a regular occurrence.
There's always something to be said too for, we'll say, families, in particular, maybe the younger siblings. I find if you do have older siblings, I suppose one, like you said, you aspire to be like them. But there also is something in engaging in kind of practice and almost like fun fun play in a sport, the younger sibling often tends to be very, very successful based off that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can learn from the mistakes they make, but I think one of the biggest advantages is just getting onto panels. So obviously, like everyone will know that you have your club system and then you have your counties, which are like maybe the next level above it. So getting onto the panel for the counties early from under 14s is the first year of it, obviously. That makes a huge difference because you're just exposed to higher quality training. And having a name like that your brother has blazed ahead and like you are his brother kind of thing, that gives you an edge to getting onto teams. There's no two ways about it. Mm-hmm. So like I would have got onto the under 14s and under 16s, and I could say looking back that it was probably a large portion of that was down to being Mark's brother rather than necessarily what I was showing, because I was very hot and cold, I would say, at the time. So yeah, that makes a huge difference. Generally getting onto those panels, you're training at a higher standard and that brings you on. So I was extremely fortuitous in that sense, and Mark certainly gave me that leg up, I would say.
When you went into secondary school then, was that who you were? Were you Mark's brother when you first arrived?
Yeah, Mark and Oisín's brother. Yeah, that's basically who I was. Yeah.
And that's a pretty notorious school sporting wise, isn't it? I think I remember playing them in football growing up, because I was in the St. Brendan's in Clare, which is also pretty famous for sports.
Yeah, Blandon's be a big hurling school. I think we have 22 parties. I think that's the most. So Archie's like the Munster Championship for hurling at the top school level. So it would be a notoriously prestigious kind of hurling school.
Did you have a group of peers in your year as well? I'm just curious, would you drive each other on in terms of like sporting performance or trying to improve each other?
Yeah, not so much. Like obviously you have friends, you have different friend groups. You have your friend group that is coming from, your mostly primary school, or the ones you're just kind of like friends with or who are around, live in Ennis, who are around Ennis, like, and they're the ones you're hanging out with. Then you have like when you're on the panels for Clare, you kind of have your hurling group, or the ones that are like playing for the school, like those school teams. That's a separate group. And I would say that those two groups were for the most part completely separate. So my peers of my good friends would have actually been not as inclined towards hurling, probably would have been more academic actually. So yeah, there was kind of a clear enough distinction, I would say, between those two groups for me.
Do you feel having those two groups and being part of both of them, do you think that kind of supported your development? Because you've obviously excelled sporting wise and you're also excelling career wise. Do you think that played a part of it?
Yeah, I'm sure it did. Like obviously your circle of friends makes a huge impact on kind of the trajectory you end up taking, and certainly like they were definitely quite academically focused, and yeah, it probably did. I mean, all of them have done very well as well, so it's probably that there was an expectation, but I would say the primary kind of push or kind of expectation setting was coming from my family, like, so that was the core, I would say, of it. But yeah, having that friend group which is not obsessed with hurling necessarily probably does kind of support that side of things as well.
Yeah, just let's spend a bit of time talking about your kind of family setup, and I'm curious to know, as you were growing up, maybe when it came to academics and sports, like for example, if you played a game of hurling and you came home, what was that atmosphere like for you at home? Would your parents be ones that would be generally supportive in terms of performance? Maybe they're a bit more like my parents. My father is very pragmatic and he can like take the game in isolation, and then my mother would probably, if I did 100 things right, she'd tell me I did them good, but if I did one thing wrong, she'd definitely hone in on that, and say, oh, but you could have done this a little bit better. I'm curious from your perspective what your parents were like from that aspect.
Yeah, it's interesting looking back. I'm not like, they were always extremely supportive. That was the bottom line. They were always extremely supportive. However that manifested, it came across in different ways, I'd say, but they would never really have critiqued me massively when I played poorly, I would say. That was which was something that I didn't need. Like, when you play bad. And they were always extremely positive when I played well. So yeah, for me anyway, it was the perfect balance. Like, I didn't need to be told that I played bad, and I don't need anybody telling me that. I'm aware of that. They were just extremely supportive, I would say. There's slightly different ways in that kind of how that manifested, like, and my dad would probably be more into hurling, but my mother was also like at every game and bringing me to every training. So she was also massively invested. So it was always more just about me rather than my performance, I would say, which was obviously how it should be, I guess.
Yeah, you often tend to be your harshest critic, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
I thought you were going to say to me, Podge, I've never played bad, and just go from there.
Unfortunately, not the truth. There's many documented occasions, but yeah, no.
there's no escaping it. I'm curious, is there any other passions you might have had growing up outside of hurling?
Like, I wasn't actually I didn't love playing loads of sports. I didn't love the like going into a new kind of like group of people I didn't know. I guess I was shy, but so when I found hurling, I didn't really feel like, oh, I need to find other sports to play here. Like, I was like, yeah, happy to do that, and I'll just do that. And like I played a lot of like computer games, PlayStation, all that kind of stuff, and I still do play a lot of them. That wasn't a fad of my teenage years. I play with friends, and that's something that is essentially part of what I do. Yeah, so I'd say they were probably the main pieces, to be honest. Like school, obviously, is a big part of all people's younger lives, and then like hurling and playing games and just hanging out. Yeah, nothing else really, I'd say, outside of that.
What kind of computer games would you play?
Kind of depends if I'm playing multiplayer with the guys. Like sometimes Call of Duty, sometimes like Helldivers 2 is what I'm kind of been playing recently with a couple of lads. And then I play when I'm playing not with my friends, it's like Dota 2, which is something that's like probably not that familiar with. But or then I play like single player games like Civilization or any of the Total War games or anything like that. So there's a broad enough library of games that I'm happy to play.
Nice. So it's still something you like to do?
Yeah, I do it all the time. I do it all the time. It works very nicely with having to rest and stuff after training, especially when you're in high load part of the year, or when you're like playing games and your body is broken and bruised the next day. Not really having to do anything physically to entertain yourself is a positive. So it actually kind of gels quite nicely with playing hurling and stuff like that.
Definitely a good switch off. And I suppose like when you're progressing in, like your sport is incredibly intense, your career is extremely demanding as well. Just to have that kind of release is pretty important.
Yeah, it's nice to just have everyone has it, like, but mine is just happens to be games, whether it's like reading or whatever it might be. But yeah, just turn the brain off and just play our game, and a few hours later then time has passed and you go off and do something else.
Yeah, I'm extremely bad when it comes to any like first person shooter, any games like that. The only ones I tend to play currently is FIFA, which I truly love. It's going to sound a bit strange, but even before I play a match, I actually like playing a game of FIFA. So I think it's something to do with, going to sound woo woo here, but like the patterns are just getting in the practice of an actual game mode. I find it beneficial, but first person shooters, absolutely terrible. I'm the person who'll hide behind the wall or maybe try be a sniper, but that's as far as it can go. I'm terrible.
Yeah, no, I like the FPS games. But yeah, I get what you mean. It's nice. I've like even the morning games, like it's nice just to like not thinking about it, switch off for an hour or two while you're kind of like waiting between meals or before you meet up or that kind of stuff, just to kind of like take your mind off it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Just kind of bringing us back to your schooling. Let's say we can move forward into your secondary school life. And I'm very curious, when it came to around the time of the leaving cert, like how did you balance the pressures of you were a minor around the years of secondary school, so playing minor hurling with the demands of the leaving cert?
I think I'd realized when I did the junior cert, which is obviously half a 2 year school years, that some people were going to be giving up hurling or whatever sport just to like focus on the junior cert. I found that extremely strange at the time, and then that kind of was like carried into leaving cert. When I got into leaving cert, then it was just like there was never a moment that I considered not playing. And I think the balance came naturally. It was like, John, you spend your time in school, whatever, you're doing your class or whatever. And then like you train and you just get that new lease of life, like from just going training or getting a break out of the studying or whatever it might be. And I wasn't an amazing studier. I was very good in class. Like I paid attention. I did everything they told me to do. Like I wasn't spending hours and hours in the evening studying. Like I just kind of did my homework and that was essentially it. So getting that break out where like, yeah, you're spending a lot of time sitting down. I don't need to sit down for another 4 hours in the evening. Like training just kind of gels nicely with that. And I just didn't spend that much time thinking about whether I should or should not be hurling. It was just, I was going to be hurling. I was going to be playing sport, and the leaving cert was something that I had to contend with at the same time. So they were going to have to talk to each other, and I was going to figure out a way for both of them. There was never a moment where I was like, maybe I'll give up the hurling for the year. That just wasn't on the radar.
And that's something a lot of people actually do, because a lot of pressures tend to come with the leaving cert. And for those of our listeners who are again outside of Ireland, it's essentially you have one set of exams in your subjects, and it's the do or die to make or break whether you go to college and go to the course that you want to go to as well. So I think we tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves in that sense, but it sounds like you really, even from such a young age, and maybe it was because you had your brothers who had gone for it before you had kind of the supportive influence of your family, but you tended not to put that much pressure on yourself academically. And that's not to say you dismissed it and you didn't study. You essentially did what you could, but didn't overemphasize the leaving cert is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I put as much emphasis as on like everybody's going to take it seriously because it's there to be taken seriously and it dictates what course you get into college. So obviously it's very significant, but I knew myself I was not able to do the kind of hours other people were doing in the evenings. I just was not that way inclined to be able to sit down and do another 3 or 4 hour study in the evening. I knew myself that I couldn't do that, basically. So there was no point in me trying to push that part of it. So it just kind of had to work within, and I was good in class. I was getting good results. So just felt like it was something that I didn't have to change what I was doing, basically. And in some ways it would be what it would be. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to go ballistic or change that much, and I'm gonna get what I get from the leaving cert, and then I'll figure it out from there. It had pressure on because it's a leaving cert, it's a big deal, but I wasn't heaping on any unnecessary pressure after that.
Did you find the context switching between hurling and study was actually good for you?
Yeah, definitely. I'm just like social outlet of meeting your friends and spending some time with them. Like I think people really do wall themselves away sometimes when it comes to leaving cert, and going back, I wouldn't change a thing. And I think in general, that's a reasonably good sign of you did things reasonably okay.
Yeah, given the timing of this podcast, there's students all over Ireland are just receiving their results. They're probably getting their CEO stuff coming out shortly, right? That if they've got their course or not. Would you have any advice for them when it comes to their studies moving forward into college?
I think any people our age now, where you're like, I'm 30 now, you can look back at it and think like, it really, you can get to where you want to get to. And like so many people are picking their courses off like such limited information. You're picking something for like, ostensibly you're picking your career at 18, which is just it's not gonna work that way. So like, you're gonna get it wrong. The vast majority of people are gonna get it wrong, and that's totally fine. Like if you don't end up in your career till you end with your life till your late 20s, so what? Like you're going to be working till by the time you retire, probably 70. That's fine. Like if it takes you 5 or 10 years to find your career, you're going to be in it for another 40 years. Just like, don't worry about it that much. You'll end up where you want to be. But it is a very stressful period. Like people feel like it's this one shot to get what you want, and if you miss it, then that's it. It's like, that's just not the case. And I think time and time again, and any person that's kind of gone through that and is 10 or 15 years later, looking back on it, will appreciate that, like, yeah, there's so many opportunities to pivot and change or to restart and go somewhere else. So like it happens all the time. Happens in all our friends groups, like it's not a straight trajectory through from leaving cert to college through to work. It's just not. So you'll figure out where you need to get to, basically.
Especially now, even when I was doing the leaving cert, it was emphasized to me, like I was kind of chatting with my mother, and it always came up the classics, like teaching would be a good job because it was good pay, better pay at the time of when I was applying, steady, stable job. But the careers in the last 5 or 10 years have just totally changed. Like it's not really you do one thing for the rest of your life. It can happen, but a lot of careers are changing and fixing, and you're even noticing that yourself from your PhD studies to the work you're in now is like slightly different. So careers progress. I think they're a lot different and they go through different stages, and you can have multiple careers in one life too.
Yeah, 100%. The job for life is kind of an artifact of the past, and that's a good thing. It's a lot more flexibility. Like my job is tangential to science, but my actual job as a product manager is working with software developers to get software built. Like that's not scientific work on my day to day. So like in reality, it's very different, and I love it. It's great, but like that's not a clear, path from doing an undergrad and doing a PhD in science. That's not like a natural connection. So that's what everybody's going to be dealing with, like just figuring out these kind of connections to where they actually want to go to.
And just on your career, like what are there other academic areas that might have interested you besides microbiology and genetics?
So I always liked science. When I was doing my leaving cert, you have to pick subjects, obviously. So I did like biology, chemistry, and accounting. I always liked science, and I like business, kind of like numbers stuff as well. So it was always going to be something like that. But I could have done, I remember the person who suggests what CEO course you should go for, guidance counselor.
Guidance counselor, yeah.
Yeah, was saying that I should do basically engineering or physics or something like that. And I could have, but it just also wasn't really what I wanted to do. So, but that was probably the scope, somewhere between science and engineering. And I just didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I had a broad strokes of like, yeah, science will be fine. I'll figure it out without kind of putting too much emphasis on trying to dictate the rest of my life at 18. But yeah, that was basically it. I chose genetics down in Cork, and it was great. It was great. I just enjoyed it. I didn't like, some people get really bogged down, and it is important to think about like what career you want to do. I'm not trying to like be flippant about like, oh, just pick whatever you want and it'll be perfect. But you should be picking something that will in generally lead you in the right direction. And genetics was that for me. In general, it led me in the right direction, and I figured out after that.
Yeah, and I definitely share the love of science with you. I do have a degree as a science teacher, so hopefully your science teacher inspired you to go on and do it. But I do think science, or a degree in science, is pretty useful in a way that it is flexible. I think if you do have your undergrad in some scientific studies, it allows you to merge into different areas as you probably discover more of your niche or what you want to work in.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say science, it's not so like engineering is actually, I would say, very different to science. You do engineering, you come straight out of college and you go into an engineering job, and it's very clear cut, and then you work as an engineer for as long as you want. But science is not really like that. There isn't really a generic scientific role for you to pick up. Like being a scientist is not something that you just do in the same way that you do engineering. It splinters in a lot of directions, and that can be a positive or a negative. Like it isn't clear cut. You will get a job straight away. You have so many opportunities as well. So it's a little bit less clear, but it does leave you with a lot of opportunities to go in different directions.
Just kind of on this idea of now, we'll just imagine now you've gone into college, the minors, you've the under 21s, you would have been coming onto the senior team at the same time as well, while trying to do your studies. Like, how did you find that, trying to compete at such a high level while also trying to maintain good grades when you were in college?
I think this is where my kind of like somewhat relaxed attitude towards like it'll be fine probably caught up with me a small bit, where like I realized after a year or two in college doing my undergrad in genetics, I like, okay, obviously getting through my exams, no problem, wasn't failing them or anything, but it was just like I wasn't really getting the results that I was getting in school, because the balance of like time spent hurling to time spent in college was really skewing towards hurling, because I was on the senior team straight away in first year. I was driving up and down to Cork, which I mean is a couple hours each way. So like large portions of my day was just like driving, training, then coming back. And you obviously have a team and a manager who's expecting a huge amount of you from the senior, and you don't have that in college. Like no professor is shouting and roaring at you or junk like onto you all the time, or messaging into groups that you're in all the time of like what's expected of you. So it was probably where I started to skew heavily towards spending my time and focus on hurling rather than college. And I mean, it rebalances, but definitely it took an active, like a conscious effort for me to be like, actually, I need to take a bit of the reins here and actually pull things back and be a little bit more control of my time that I'm spending towards hurling, because that was really like becoming a black hole of my time. Like everything was going towards that, whereas my college needed to be kind of rebalanced a small bit more after maybe the first year. The first year obviously ended up with us winning with Clare as well. Like that was my first year on the panel. That then just like came into the second year of college. We had just won the All-Ireland, and it was just total chaos. So that was really after that kind of settled from that after quite a long time. That was where I was like, okay, like college, I need to start doing college properly, basically.
I remember that I was actually into my last year as well, and yeah, that must have been absolutely chaotic time. So that just adds to it, right? You're just totally new to college. It is different than secondary school because it's less regimented, as you said. If you don't come to class, lecturers don't care, right? They're saying you're paying us tuition, it's up to you, whatever you want to do. So a lot of it is left to you. So you had that added stuff. You just came in like this big life event, winning the All-Ireland. It must have been really hard to kind of adjust to, there were so many life changes going on at that time for you.
Yeah, so I had my first year done. So I'd done my first year and got through that fine, and I'd met a lot of really good friends who I ended up like living in college. So thankfully it wasn't me coming from secondary school winning and going into first year in college. That would have been way worse, basically. So I'd met a load of really good friends, and I met people that I'd lived with for the rest of college then. So thankfully I didn't have to do that with the added like chaos of everything. So, but I was going into second year and it was just chaotic. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it was so many good things and something I never regret. And sometimes when I talk about it as well, I talk about it in a negative kind of sense, and I focus on the bad things. And I think it's worth keeping in context that it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, and absolute privilege to have been in that position. But there was drawbacks to it. It did make trying to just be a college student very difficult. It made it challenging being down in Cork after like Cork were the team we beat in the final, and Cork people are brilliant and they love sport, but when you go out drinking and you're having a few drinks and you're in a bar or you're in wherever, like you start to get a lot of grief. And most of it is fine, but when it goes on for 3 or 4 months, it starts to get a bit like tedious. But again, like within the context of what happened, everything was brilliant. But it's just like there is challenges that come with it.
I can imagine, Eric, like, lads, it's Christmas. Will you come on, get over it? The new season is about to start.
Yeah, it went on for a lot longer than I anticipated, but yeah.
So I did my undergrad in UL. I actually then did my master's in UCC. And what I found, maybe it's because I'm from Kerry and there's like so many people from Kerry, or even my hometown of Clare in UCC, I felt it was a lot more enclosed, a lot tighter. You'd come across the same people a lot more often. So I'm trying to like picture your experience in that sense. Like Cork seems to be really tight as a college and close knit. So yeah, you were probably encountering a lot.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I think Cork people love UCC, and like Cork people tend to stay in UCC. So it's a large percentage, a proportion of Cork people, which is brilliant. Actually, Cork people are, have such a good, and obviously I stayed there for my PhD as well. So I was there for 8 years. Like it's not like I had any intention of getting out of there quickly or anything. It is kind of in some ways closed off. It's not particularly close to any of the other major colleges in the same way that UL, I mean like NUIG is straight up the road, probably an hour away or easier to get to, just so it's a little bit more enclosed in that sense, probably.
So you mentioned, I don't want to say maybe you struggled, but you had to do some adjusting when it came to balancing. You said you were maybe overly tipped towards the hurling side versus the academic side. So did you actually tailor down the amount of hurling? Because I'm struggling to understand that, because telling an inter-county manager, hey, like, can't come to these trainings? I don't know, did that happen? Or did you just kind of up your studies and realize, okay, I have to really put more time into this?
I probably upped my studies. Like Davy Fitz was our manager with Clare at the moment, and for anyone who's kind of familiar with him, he wouldn't have maybe been that receptive to being like, I'm not going training. That wasn't a runner. I would say looking back, I did not still balance it correctly during my undergrad. Even third and fourth year were a lot better, and those were the 2 years that actually counted towards my undergrad result, basically. So they were better, but I still should have been more like selfish with my time. I should have been like, no, I'm not gonna make this gym session that you're asking me to drive back to Clare for. Like, I'm gonna do it down here, or these kind of things that, like, fine, I'll be at training because everyone has to be at training. That's kind of the expectation. I can't maybe make that decision that I'm not going to be there, but some of the maybe more auxiliary stuff or the 4-day training camps, okay, I can't do 4 days. These kind of things, it's like I should have been stronger in those things. Now, it's easy to say that looking back as someone who's kind of more senior now and who could definitely make those calls, but as a young lad, maybe I couldn't. But that's what I should have been doing. I wasn't necessarily, and I probably did just like up the time being spent in college and the attention going there, rather than dialing down the attention going to hurling. So it just became busier, basically, which was actually fine.
Yeah, when you think about it, you're so young, you're trying to really establish yourself as a main senior player, right? It's really difficult to, like you said, to say to someone like Davy Fitz, hey, I can't make this gym session. I'm curious from your perspective, and maybe from a social, like I would have been involved with the Kerry team at the time as well when I was in UL. So it was essentially down home to Kerry, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and down at the weekend again. So I was like constantly up and down. Number one, my hamstrings were falling off me from the car drive up and down. But number two, I feel from, like, I never got the full college experience, you know, like a lot of nights out sacrificed, a lot of like social events I didn't attend. I'm curious what it was like from your point of view.
Yeah, it was the exact same. And that was where also I really should have put my foot down a small bit more and be like, actually, just try to balance that a small bit, have more of a social life. So at the time, it was like 1st of January, we basically had a rule that like after 1st January, we weren't allowed to drink for the rest of the year. That was essentially it, which I mean is unbelievably punitive looking back on it now. But, you know, that was kind of the atmosphere between inter-county squads at the time. And I mean, other inter-county players were not adhering to that, but I was, and I shouldn't have. But anyway, whatever. So I had a similar experience where like I was sacrificing a huge amount of social events and just general casual events, things like that I regret. That is one of my regrets, I would say. For example, I've never had a rag week. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not that big a deal, but I never had a rag week. So it's just kind of like these things that you were just like constantly giving up, and they were smallish things, but it's still things that you would like to have experienced. And yeah, so my college undergrad was curtailed in that sense. But yeah, I would have preferred to be a little bit firmer with what I would have expected rather than always just adhering to the letter of law of what was being kind of handed down.
You feel that has shifted? Because I feel that that's the way it was, you know, like January 1st comes, or even at club level, it'd be like, lads, no alcohol because we have championship in 28 weeks, you know, like there was just some crazy stuff. Whereas I'd hear stories then of people involved in rugby and playing at a super high level in Ireland that they'd go out after every game, socializing together. And I know there's a balance, like obviously, like a lot of intake of alcohol is not good for performance, but then there's also the side effect of like the socializing aspect. I think there's something really powerful in terms of team building and team morale as well. Did you find as you're aging in your career, not to say you started going out loads of nights, but as you went through your career, through college into your PhD, were you realizing the importance of that balance, or were you able to strike more of a balance there?
I definitely was striking more of a balance towards, I would say towards the end of my PhD. Even during my PhD, it was still, because I was still doing a lot of driving, and it was still like not really conducive to me ever having a casual drink or something like that, because I mean, I was driving, you know, all the time. I was driving back to Clare, or I was driving out to where my lab was, or do you know what I mean? So I was kind of limited in that sense, but I did definitely start to, the general atmosphere around like the culture of no drink, no anything started to fade away. And you're kind of like alluding to that as well, where like 10 years ago when I first joined, that was the attitude. Like there was this abstinence approach to alcohol, which does not match with the research. It's not really stack up well to like, doesn't matter. Like it impacts your recovery. It impacts your recovery, obviously. But I mean, when it's 6 months ahead of championship, does that matter? Does it really matter? Like if you're going to be reducing your recovery by a percentage when you're training and you're not going to be training for another couple of days, like it's fine, you know? So anyway, it was just that kind of like trade-off started to become more apparent. I'd say we also changed managers, and they were a little bit more like willing to balance that and understand there was a more of a work-life balance, being like work being the hurling part of it, like, but a balance between like your social side and kind of what the expectations of a panel were. Now they would have brought in other things that like a lot of meetings and things like that, which were also challenging, but from that social side they would have started to balance that. And then like, not to jump forward, but now we have Brian Lowen for the last few years, and it's really all about balance. And he kind of like agrees the balance with the players, I would say. Like it really is this kind of like joined up group between managers and players, kind of like dictating our own standards rather than a manager or a managerial team just being like, this is what we're doing. So that is, everybody's far more on board for that, because everybody has agreed to it and everybody has like co-created it essentially. So yeah, that has really been a breath of fresh air the last few years, not to kind of like completely jump the timeline. But
yeah, I love that all the players and the management kind of collaborate together versus this like binary yes or no approach. I think that's pretty interesting and pretty smart, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like you get buy-in from people when you do that. And I think it's been apparent the years that Brian has been with us that there's been, yeah, not even just on these kind of like standards, but also just like how we're going to play and certain approaches we want to do. Like if players bring something, like ultimately the management decide, that's the nature of the hierarchy that's there. But as long as they're willing to take in the information or take in suggestions or whatever it might be from the players, and we can actually have the conversation, that's for the most part all that the players want. You know, they just want to be heard and have their perspectives understood and listened to. And ultimately, if the decision is made the opposite way, I mean, that's fine. That's the decision has to be made. But as long as they're taking in the information, be that the standards, be that the tactics, be that a personal approach to the match, you know, all these things are kind of up for discussion in a good way.
I think that's a very modern approach to management and leadership too, isn't it? Versus like top down giving demands. It's very much getting the players involved and trying to create a joint sense of culture there too.
Yeah, definitely. And it came about so organically. It wasn't like he came in and was like, this is how we're going to do things. It actually was just like we had such a blend of like, we have quite a senior group of players that have been with Clare for, you know, the same length time, have been maybe 10 years. More than 10 years, but we've been there quite a while, and we feel like we have a good understanding of what we should be doing. But we also understand that the manager is the manager, and all we can really do is feed into that. But I think he held a lot of trust in us as well, and the management held a lot of trust in the players, in that like we're all striving for the same goal. Do you know what I mean? We're all trying to get the same thing. So once everybody has that common ground, and that is constantly come back to being like, yeah, we're all looking for the same thing here, even if we're disagreeing very strongly about things, we all do want for Clare to win the All-Ireland, basically. And when you have that kind of like common ground, it makes things quite easy to actually hash out the differences.
Do the players and management take into consideration the players' life outside hurling? So when you're doing your PhD, did you find the people in your camp are very supportive of that? Or do you feel people are saying it's detracting, don't leave a takeaway from the hurling now or your performance? Or what was that like?
They would definitely never say the latter. Like it would never be an explicit, like you need to chill on the time you're spending doing your research because, you know, or like you can't do that overnight experiment because it'll impact your sleep and your recovery, you know. It was never like that. But everybody's doing their own thing. So like there's so many different players doing different things that like for the management to have like a real like zeroed in focus on one person, they don't have that level of resolution, I would say, on any individual player, unless there's probably stuff going wrong, but that was never really stuff going wrong necessarily for me. So yeah, in general, they would have been supportive, but not like directly supportive as in like, I know you've an overnight experiment coming up, so, you know, feel free to just do the warm up and training on the next morning. You know, it was never like that. Also, if I came to them, it was like my training load is very high considering I haven't been sleeping because I've been doing these experiments. That would have been taken into account as well. So it was somewhere in between, I would say.
Do you imagine, Shane, give me a list of modules you're doing. I have severe interest. I want to see what you're up to.
Yeah, exactly. So they also have so many, like the nature of hurling is everyone's amateur. So everybody's doing different things. So it's not like in professional sport where you know everybody's kind of following the same lines. It's quite different to that. So it's hard to keep tabs on everyone, I would say, from the manager's perspective.
I think that makes it even more difficult. And it's definitely mind blowing for people outside of Ireland that you're essentially playing, I know it's quote unquote amateur, but when you break down the amount of time commitment, when you break down just the severe skill level of hurling itself, you know, you're really acting in a professional setup. And then on top of that, you're driving back and forth to Cork, you're focusing on a PhD, which is no easy feat alone, minus the hurling. Like just severe admiration for people in the GA who are pursuing their careers. And it's happening more and more, which is really, really nice to see. People are pursuing PhDs and big careers while maintaining this high level of performance. It's not easy.
It's not necessarily easy, but there's so many things that aren't easy. I think it's brilliant. It's great to see more and more people doing it. I think like I'd always advocate for that kind of balance. And I would always have said that it's great having two things you take seriously like that, because one of them is not going well, which is inevitable, that one of them will not go well at some stage, that you can just focus on the other, or at least draw some positivity from the other. You lose a big game and the next morning or the morning after that, you're back in work and you're in meetings and the people in the UK don't care about your game. Do you know what I mean? So you kind of have to switch off from it, and that does genuinely benefit you. It allows you to kind of like, just take your attention off it, and allows you to kind of move through it easier rather than ruminating on it and getting really down about these kind of like tough moments in one aspect of your life, basically. So it does really work very well hand in hand. And I think that's something people who do it kind of would always advocate for it. And I'd definitely be in the same boat as that.
I think that's a great way to take the conversation, Shane, is do you have things that you've learned from hurling that you apply to your career, your work life, or vice versa?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think it's actually more clear coming from hurling, because that's where I would have spent a lot of my, earlier years of, even during undergrad and PhD. Definitely learned more from my hurling going that direction than I would have from my career towards hurling. And I think most of it is coming towards, like, I've kind of thought about it a couple of times before, but around the team, the impact of a team, or having a team or a group of people rowing in the same direction. I think when I first joined Eagle Genomics after I finished my PhD, I was like a startup company, and really exciting company doing some really cool things. I was so excited about joining, and then very quickly realized that the PhD doing research is quite an individual kind of like role. Do you know what I mean? Like, the research you're doing is for the most part, you just do it and you track the results and you decide what you're going to do next, and you get advice and suggestions from your supervisors, and they tell you, like, I think you should do this thing, that, whatever it is. But ultimately, you make the decisions and you do the work yourself. And, it's not really, there's no sort of team element to it. Like, you're good friends there, obviously, because everybody's in there in a channel way, but it's not a team thing. It's really individual, which is one of the things I didn't love about it. But anyway, when I joined the company, then suddenly it was in this team. Like, we're a company, relatively small company, all striving to make the company succeed, basically. It became apparent to me really quickly that was not necessarily the case. People's motives and goals are completely different, or even at odds with each other sometimes. And that was really jarring, coming from like a high performing amateur team, a high performing team where everybody, if you asked them in the group, what was your goal for the year, they would tell you the exact same thing. Do you know what I mean? They would say it's to win the All-Ireland. That's it. So like, at the common denominator, everybody was working off the same assumption that we are moving towards everything that moves us in the direction of winning the All-Ireland is good. And anything that distracts us from that is bad. And then when I joined this company, it was like, we do not have the same goals. Each team and each person has completely different. Maybe it's a career progression thing. Maybe it's to show that our team is doing better than your team, and like crazy stuff. And that was so jarring. And trying to take what I knew from hurling being the best way to approach these things, of like having people rowing in the same direction, and apply that to a company where you're trying to like get people to just like, I don't know, move in the same direction and agree on a kind of like baseline understanding or common ground, just did not work. Yeah, it was really interesting, but it was definitely something that I became more apparent to me how important it is for everyone to be kind of like sing off the same hymn sheet and want the same things.
What kind of techniques did you use in your career to try and help people to row in the same direction?
For the most part, it's just building relationships. So much of these things are just like building relationships and trying to get people to see your perspective. Most of the challenges I've seen in my companies I've been part of, where like people are they don't see what you're doing, they don't see what your team are doing, they don't see what the other teams are doing, and they have this, because they don't see the output or whatever it is, they just think that, oh, they're doing nothing. And it's just sometimes an exercise in actually like building the relationship, sharing what you're doing, kind of getting this like cross-team communication going, so that they can see, oh yeah, okay, well actually, I can see what they're doing, or I can see how it's impacting the company and how that's actually moving us forward and all that kind of stuff. I think it really, when there's been a lot of like friction between different teams in the places I've been, it's been through lack of visibility on what everyone is doing. And then there's this natural like, what are you doing? I'm working so hard here, what are you doing? And vice versa as well. Like, you feel like, I'm working so hard, I don't even know how you're contributing to it, I don't know if you're helping at all. But then invariably everybody is working hard, like, and you're just not seeing what they're doing necessarily. So that kind of like building relationship between teams I found extremely helpful. Now it didn't save my last company. My other company went under, and it's the nature of startups. It's definitely something that I would have learned from that.
I think it's something that startups definitely face as you naturally grow, or if you're trying to grow fast, you do tend to go into silos, like different departments, different teams. And I find from my experience too, like you said, narratives can build up, I'm doing all this work and this team is doing nothing. And it's purely down to a lack of, not purely, but one contributing aspect could be to a lack of communication and a lack of understanding of what the other teams are doing. And that's kind of sounds like the gap that you were trying to bridge.
Yeah, 100%. And like, I work in product, so a lot of our role is to talk to other teams and understand what their problems are, so that you can productize, or to build solutions for those problems a lot of the time. So we are forced into like having those conversations, but then you also start to get this visibility, or this, you understand the frustration from the other teams. Like, they have been asking for these things for how long, and it's been falling on deaf ears because there hasn't been like maybe a framework or a structure for it to be internalized and understood and solved for. So yeah, it's like people are people at the end of the day. When you actually talk to them and you understand what the problem is and you understand their frustration, it makes sense. These are reasonable people that are like high achieving for the most part, and they are frustrated for a reason. Do you know what I mean? It's not like they're just want to vent. They want to make progress, and something is stopping them, and that's what's starting to irk them a bit. So yeah, it is that kind of building that relationship, so that they're willing to, when something's not going well or they're getting frustrated, they're actually willing to reach out to you and have a conversation and explain it, rather than building up some sort of grudge of being like, I can't believe they're not helping me, or whatever it might be.
That can happen. Just to take us back to something we spoke about earlier, we spoke about the leaving cert and like choosing a subject to go into study, whether it's engineering or whether it's science. And what's really interesting about that is we're here now talking like you have your PhD, but it's a lot of it comes down to these quote unquote soft skills in terms of like how we can communicate, how we can team build within a group as well. I think they're very, very translatable skills that everyone needs.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's worth one kind of maybe emphasizing either like the skills that I've gained from hurling have probably been the skills that have allowed me to make the transition from a science role to essentially a tech role. So like I didn't go and learn coding. Do you know what I mean? I didn't go do a course in software development. I just relied on what I'd learned from hurling, being like that building relationship, building that team kind of environment. And that has served me unbelievably well in my career to date. So yeah, it is like those soft skills that people sometimes they're not necessarily at the front of any job application, but they're the ones that really do allow you to excel in those roles, I think.
I think that's what I really, really appreciate about sport. Like if you take a football pitch or a hurling pitch, it's essentially just an area, I think, where you can kind of learn and develop about yourself, both in terms of like your physicality and your skill in the particular sport. But there's also like that team building aspect, that communication aspect, that last 5 minutes of a game when things are incredibly tense. Like, how do you yourself pull yourself through that? Like, how are you resilient? How do you act in that? I call it a pressure moment, but when you take a step back, like, yes, like the game you were involved in over a month ago, I was at it and I was on the edge of my seat, like incredibly intense. But then when you look in the grand scheme of life, is it intense? Like, not really in comparison to what some people are going through. It's really about fun and about sport. But I do think it's a good little microcosm and a good area to put yourself in these situations.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more. It does kind of, just like how you started talking about like this environment you're put in where like you're forced to figure it out, and you can see people who excel in being able to work within a team or work within a structure. And I mean, you end up talking to a lot of like young people, especially in the club and stuff, of like trying to like your parents be telling you to like make sure you convey to them how important it is to play hurling and stuff like this. And really the message I try to get across, or how a lot of us try to get across, just be involved in a team sport. It doesn't matter necessarily if it's hurling, but the amount of benefit you get from having to operate within a team and trying to succeed with the team and failing with the team, and understanding that like when you put in a lot of effort doesn't necessarily equal a success, but what you learn from being in that environment and having to operate within those parameters is so valuable. And I mean, yeah, I already said about how that has served me very well, but also it's just like all the social sides of like building that kind of like friends and all those things for life as well. So when people like try to get me to tell everyone to play hurling, it's more just like, just be involved in a team sport. It brings you so much value.
Yeah, I fully agree. In terms of like the final, obviously incredible. It's 30 plus subs, like incredible high achievers trying to attain a particular goal. And that I think is a very nice segue to a bit of time that you spent in Harvard, actually, which of course would be full of very, very much high achievers as well. And what I'd love to know is, that's an environment that is, say, different from the pitch, right? And I presume maybe being in a different environment, you didn't want to go in as Shane the hurler, right? You wanted to go in on your own merits based on what you've studied and based on like your personality and your characteristics. But how did you find your time there? How did you find connecting with the people in that environment, trying to work with them?
In general, I found it perfectly fine. I mean, I relied on the same kind of like what we were just talking about trying to build relationships to try and like, make this a kind of environment that I'm more familiar with. But I mean, you're obviously going to be so nervous. Like you're going over to an institution that has a reputation like Harvard and you genuinely think that you shouldn't be there. Do you know what I mean? That is the natural kind of response, I think. So it took quite a while to kind of clear that. But yeah, I mean, it was slowly just through like a couple of very fortuitous interactions with people who I became friends with and then met all their friends and then suddenly had a great group that was just like, yeah, a lot of them are researching and have done their PhDs in Harvard and all that. But like at the end of the day, they were just normal people. They were like, enjoyed doing the same things I enjoyed doing and got frustrated by the same things I got frustrated by. And it's saying that there was that human connection that you kind of like brought back to. It's kind of like walking into the Clare senior panel at 17 or 18 and you see these players that you've watched for ages and you're like, wow, they're incredible and I can't believe I'm here. It was kind of like that in an academic world. But then when you get to know them, they're just normal people. I mean, they're just the same as you and I. And then through the time I was there, I was only there for maybe 7 months. And I mean, I chose that time. I should have chose longer and just taken a year off hurling and stayed there for a year, but that's beside the point. During the time I was there, because they're up here when you start and you're down here in your mind and you go over and then suddenly you realize that we're all the same, essentially. Like, yeah, these people are impressive, but I mean, loads of impressive people in UCC that I was in college with, loads of people that would fit in perfectly here that are extremely intelligent. So it makes you feel like, well, I'm just the same as them, and you have this kind of like this innate confidence that kind of is built from them. Obviously, there's the fact that they're American and there's a natural confidence that comes with a lot of kind of like living over there, which I absolutely loved. But yeah, it just kind of makes you think, yeah, I'm on par with these people basically. But that took some time, definitely.
Yeah, I've spent a good bit of time in America too, and I don't know if this resonates with you, but I find them very uplifting and positive. So if I come out with an idea, like the usual response I get is, "That's great, man! Like you should go for that." Whereas, like, I'm not going to get too negative in terms of like Irish mentality, but like, you know, the concept tall poppy syndrome. I don't know if you come across that, but it's kind of almost like try not to stand out too much, you know, almost kind of fall in with the crowd. I think we've moved away from that recently. I think it was definitely more prominent years ago, but I just found something very positive when I was in America too. And I'm curious if the people you were working with in Harvard were like very encouraging to you when it comes to your studies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody probably, but anybody I talked to that's spent some time in America has that similar kind of experience where they're just like, yeah, everything is possible. Do you know what I mean? And the people you hang out with genuinely push you to be like, yeah, do that. Yeah, try that, whatever. It's also not as much a fear of failure. It's like, yeah, so what if it doesn't work? Especially when it comes to like, there will be a number of people that I've been friends with that have been setting up their kind of businesses over there. And just like in general conversation about whether they were nervous about it, they were like, yeah, John, I'm nervous, but if it fails, that's fine. Try again, something else. So there is that kind of reduced stigma around just like getting things wrong, I think, and an overarching kind of like positivity that you definitely felt as well, but it's definitely just part of the being in America, to be honest. So that was brilliant. And like my friend group was kind of like a couple of Irish people, a lot of French people actually, and a good few Americans. So it was like a nice blend, but they had all spent quite a lot of time in America. So they were just fantastic people, just extremely positive and super interesting to be around. And it was just, yeah, it was a great time.
Yeah, it sounds like a great experience. And you mentioned you were there for 7 months, but you kind of wish you brought it out to a year. Is that a regret of yours?
Yeah, I would say it is. I mean, I chose the 6-7 months because that would have brought me back in March or April, and it meant I could play that year's championship with Clare. I could have chose up to 18 months. That was part of the group, like with Fulbright. They would have funded me for that much. I essentially had to choose. It would have been difficult to go over 12 months, but that's beside the point. I could have gone up to 18. And yeah, it's a regret. It's a regret. But I mean, like, I made the decision with the best information I had at the time. And in that sense, I don't regret it. And that, like, I probably would have made the decision if I was back in 2018 again with the same information. But yeah, I would have preferred to spend more time there. It was just a fantastic experience. Living in Boston was just brilliant. And the people I was friends with over there were exceptional. So yeah, it's just a great experience.
Yeah, absolutely. You wouldn't have been there for I was going to say, was there any pressure to play in Boston? But you probably weren't there for the summer season, of course.
Yeah, just the winter. Yeah. And I was conscious that I didn't want to just, not that there's anything wrong with it, but I didn't want to just like go over and spend time with all the hurlers over there, meet with the hurling club and just be friends with hurlers. Because I mean, I've great friends who love hurling in Clare, but I wanted to experience something different. So I was very conscious that I was gonna try and not stay away, but just understand, like build friend group outside of hurling over there. And yeah, I think I made the right decision in that sense. I kind of had like a very rough, like maybe 6 weeks or 2 months kind of like of my time over there. If I hadn't made any friends at that stage, like I was going to reach out and just like go to the GA club and stuff like that. But fortunately, I kind of within 3 or 4 weeks, I've met a few people that then it kind of cascaded from there. But I was conscious to keep hurling as just not really mention it and just to be a researcher who is over there researching and to just be viewed in that sense.
Yeah, live that life. And it is like, don't get me wrong, it's a wonderful thing to fall back on. Like the Gaelic football has allowed me to travel into the States and make friends instantly. But one summer I was in New York playing football, and essentially you're staying in this little area of a town outside New York, and you might as well be in a town in Ireland, you know, it's just all Irish people everywhere. So I think you were right in a sense to remove yourself from that to try get immersed in the full experience while you had it for the 7 months.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like I've loads of friends who live in Yonkers in New York, like, and that is like, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was thinking it might be. It's essentially like a town in Ireland, like you said, you know, so like, and that's brilliant, but that just wasn't what I was going to Boston for. So I tried to keep it separate. It's funny, there was two Irish guys I was friends with in our kind of water group, and they knew I played hurling, obviously, and I just made sure I just asked them not to ever mention hurling, basically.
Oh,
so,
really? Wow.
Yeah. So it was like 3 or 4 months in, like I'd come back after Christmas and it was January and I was going to be leaving in kind of late March, basically. And I was like, okay, we can start talking about hurling now, basically, Johnson. I can live this double life anymore.
You're like Ron Burgundy. You just pull everyone aside and go, I'm kind of a big deal.
It was so yeah, that was, and I appreciated them kind of going along with it. It's funny, I spent Thanksgiving with one of their kind of like extended families because they had relations in America, so we spent time there. It was a really nice like day and dinner and everything. We stayed a couple of nights there and it was just brilliant. Like really immerse yourself in kind of American culture. And they were so just welcoming. It was incredible. But anyway, they started talking. They realized we were Irish, obviously, me and Connor, and started talking about Ireland and that they'd been to Ireland. And one of the uncles then started being like, oh, I actually went to this hurling game before over there. Oh, it's such a brilliant sport. And started talking about hurling. And he was talking to me and Connor about hurling and just like, oh, it's so great. And Connor was almost like vibrating beside me, being like, surely we have to tell him. I was like, no, let's just, because I was just enjoying just being this kind of random person in kind of like a purely American kind of like, I don't know, occasion. It was just so great. I was like, I'd actually prefer not to. So,
and you didn't the whole night?
No.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I kept it.
That's fantastic. But that sounds like a really, really good experience. And now if we kind of fast forward to present day, I'm curious to know like what motivates you now, maybe both in your academic career and in hurling.
I think the hurling one is easier, so it makes just start there. I think it is just that I enjoy it. I genuinely, if I stopped enjoying it now, I have enough time spent with Clare that I would just stop playing. That's the reality. And I think there's such a good group there. There's, as I mentioned, such a good relationship with like the management, the whole structure there is just so positive. Obviously we won this year, so that is just even more kind of fuel into that, like enjoying it, enjoying the experience and enjoying all of it. So that is what motivates me now. I mean, I love going playing. I love playing the big matches. I love going training with all my friends, you know, and there's just such a positive and enjoyable experience at the moment that is what is motivating me. Somewhat selfishly, it's just like that's what I'm doing it for. And if that stopped, I would stop playing, basically. So that's the hurling side of it. The career side of it is just like to see what you can do. I think a lot of people in their careers just like want to see how far they can push it, how high they can get, and see what they can end up doing. And I think that's kind of where I'm at the moment. I want to just like keep building my skills, and then I ideally would set up my own company in a few years. Kind of, it would probably work with when I retire from Clare. Then I would pivot towards like pouring all that extra time into like setting up my own company. That's just like my mental model at the moment of how it will work. Maybe that won't pan out that way, but that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, you have a nice framework in place. And I like what you said about the sport. And it kind of ties into my next question is like, how has your drive maybe evolved over time? Do you know, do you still feel like you have the same passion as when you started in both areas? Or do you feel it's shifted over time? Because you seem to have a great appreciation now. Like you seem to be, I'm not saying you're satisfied in the sense that you don't want to win anymore. Of course, you're a competitor, you want to win, but you seem really satisfied with the place you're at. You seem to be really enjoying the teamwork aspect of it with your teammates. And yeah, it just seems like you're in a really good spot. So I'm curious to know Like, has that drive evolved over time from maybe when you were younger in your career?
Yeah, it definitely has. I think when I first came onto the senior panel or around then, like when I was 18 or so, it was kind of like what's expected of you. You know, if you're a good hurler and you're invited into the panel, that's what you do. You don't think about it. You don't be like, am I gonna enjoy this now or is this gonna be hell or something? So you just do it. And we won the first year and then everything's chaos and all that great stuff that comes with it. But it was still like I was in the Clare panel. I was enjoying so much of it, but I wasn't conscious of how much I was enjoying, if that makes sense. I wasn't like stepping back being like, oh, this is great. Like I'm more like that now. And I think a part of it was just like I was expected to just continue to hurl and I expected that of me as well. Like I didn't ever think that, oh, maybe I should drop myself off the panel and go pursue something else. It was like, what else would you do? Do you know, what else would you want? Basically, like this is what you should be doing. But just led it to being maybe just like more of a, you're enjoying it and it's great and you're benefiting a lot from it, like we've kind of covered. But I think now it's more like a conscious appreciation of how much I really enjoy like being involved in the big games, and when we win, how much I enjoy and just like celebrating those moments with my friends and things. And I'm more conscious of how like much my family, how much it means to them and how much it means to my girlfriend and how much it means to my wider social group. Do you know, it's just like I'm more consciously aware of that stuff. So I think I'm deriving more enjoyment from that as well, whereas before it would have been slightly different.
Yeah, I don't know, is it an introspective thing, or is it just maybe just us getting older? It seems like a greater appreciation for what you're doing. You know, it really is obviously a pleasure, and like you said, to be able to do it for your friends, your girlfriend, your family as well, it just makes it that bit more meaningful.
Yeah, I don't think anything in reality, probably nothing has changed except that like we have a really good group at the moment, management, players, as I said. So maybe that has evolved to be like slightly better, but we always had a great group. Do you know what I mean? So maybe it's probably just a completely, I'm reflecting on it, or we're reflecting on it more. But yeah, I definitely appreciate it more consciously at the moment.
Do you feel satisfied or proud of what you've achieved to date, both in terms of sport and career wise?
Yeah, I do. I'm proud of what I've done. I think like definitely a lot of the players and stuff you'd ask, I think they would all be proud and they should be proud of what they've done. Doesn't mean that we're happy with where we're at either. Like Clare have won 5 All-Irelands ever. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not an amazing statistic. And really, when you see our neighbours celebrating 5 in their careers, it's kind of like we can do more. Like, so until it's done and it's a few years past and I've managed to disconnect from my playing bit, which is hopefully a few years away, I won't be able to look back on it and say like, am I happy with my career? But I think at the moment I'm proud of what I've managed to achieve to date.
What was the expectation like when you were coming on the scene? And the reason I ask is it's definitely not the equivalent, but in club level for me with football, we had a lot of people my age were coming up. You know, we were expected, we'd say, to achieve good things. And I always remember we played an East Kerry championship, and the older people on the team at the time, we got to like a semi-final and they were losing their minds. And I remember them distinctively saying, I think I was 17, and they said like, hey, we haven't been in a semi-final for, I don't know, it was a lot of years anyway. And they said like, don't take this for granted. Like, we've only been in, this is like 1 or 2 ever, I think they were saying, in their career. And at the time, like, I'll admit I was naive. I kind of laughed because it's an East Kerry championship. It's only like 5-6 teams. Like, of course we're going to win loads of these growing up. And I've won one, and that was only a few years ago as well. And it kind of hit me around that time. I was like, shit, like these guys were trying to tell me something at the time, and I kind of pawned it off thinking they'd be ultimate success. But it's not always the case. Everyone is wanting to win. So I'm curious, what was your expectation coming in? You know, did you feel you'd be in All-Ireland semi-finals and finals very, very frequently, or what was that like?
Yeah, it's actually a very similar kind of story. Like, we would have won quite a lot underage, minor 21, and then came into the senior panel with that kind of like core group of that 21s team, like not expecting to win, but like success was something we were familiar with, I would say, albeit at a lower level than the seniors. So when we won the first year, we were like, yeah, this is where we belong. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, we should be here and we'll be competing for these, if not every year, then every second year, you know, we'll be up around the semi-finals and the finals. And then, you know, we didn't see a semi-final till 2018. We didn't see a final until this year. Do you know what I mean? So, and like the message you saying about like the older people telling you, enjoy this and embrace it, that was the exact same. I mean, it was the exact same. Clare had won their first championship game in years in 2012, like not at any level, just any championship game, qualifiers included. So we beat Dublin in the park, and we hadn't won a championship game in years. So like that was the level we were the year before we won. Then we all come in and we start to like win games and get fair, and they were saying exactly that. Don't just embrace this, enjoy. You may never be back here. And sure, like, what are you talking about? Like, we're here all the time. Do you know what I mean? And in some ways, there's no point saying that to young lads. Like, it's true, absolutely true. And like, we said it to some of the younger lads this year. We were like, just enjoy these days. And they're like, do you ever shut up? Even if
we're going to be fine.
yeah, exactly. So like, in some ways, there's no point saying it, but it is the truth. It is the truth. You should enjoy them when you get the opportunity because you just never know when they'll be back.
Isn't that amazing too? The first All Ireland you won, you know, you were that young person coming on the scene, and now, as you just said, the All Ireland just gone. You're the one giving the advice, and I'm sure, I know it's 11 years have elapsed, but I'm sure it's kind of like the blink of an eye for you career wise. It goes so fast.
Yeah, it goes so fast, and it's only when you dive into the details of like how much happens in between and how many kind of different things have happened. The one thing is that core group that I was just saying that moved from the 21s or the minor 21s into the senior in 2013. That's the same group that's there that is now the senior group with Clare. So like we have stayed the likes of like Tony, myself, John, Davy Mack, like Colin Malone, Conor Cleary, Joe David Reedy, a lot of these kind of lads that like were there for 10 plus years. They have been there every year. And to achieve with them then this year was just so special. It was just incredible. John, like so much water on the bridge, so many years that just you're not getting what you want, and then to be able to achieve again. But it's a funny turnaround. Like, yeah, my first year, and I know it's not my last year, but it's 11 years in the difference. It's like, it's an interesting change of perspective.
Yeah, and I know obviously the more titles, the better, but it does seem like there's a real sense of appreciation for the one that's just gone by.
Yeah, 100%. And we even said over the last couple of years, because we knew we had a team that was capable of competing. You know, we got to most finals a few years in a row, semi-finals years in a row, and we were like, if we get this, if we win the All Ireland, we will appreciate this one so much. And I think we have been true to that. Like, we have embraced and enjoyed it as much as possible.
Shane, I was actually at the All Ireland final, and I came home and watched analysis of the game, and people were saying it was like a game for the ages. It was one of the best finals ever. I'm just curious from your perspective, like, did you see it as that in real time, or were you just focused on trying to win the game?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the latter. You're just focused on what you can do to keep moving forward and keep kind of contributing to the team. I mean, I just said it, but you're not thinking like when James Harney gets a great score, you're like, God, that was a great score. This has really turned into a great game. You don't care at the end of the day. If your team wins 1-0, then you're absolutely delighted. So after you do kind of reflect on a small bit, you're like, yeah, it's great to be a part of these incredible games and to be involved in them. And it's a privilege to be able to play a sport at that level and to be able to be involved in such an incredible occasion. But at the end of the day, it is just about winning. I mean, if it was a terrible game, I just wouldn't care. You know, it's just like, we won the game. That's what we came to do. That's what the goal was at the start of the year. That's what we've been trying to do for the last 10 years. It would be a relatively minor or mute point if it was a terrible game. But it's a nice to have, I think, for it to be good. And I think that's probably how I'd phrase it.
Yeah, and if you were here chatting to me, you know, and you came out the other end of that game, you wouldn't care how good the game was.
Yeah, 100%. And if you ask some of the Cork people, like they would say the same. Like, yeah, I guess it's fine, nice to be in a great game, but we lost. So that was what, you know, they'd be as disappointed as if it was a terrible game and they lost. You know, it makes no real material difference in that sense.
Do you feel a sense of relief you're still not in UCC at this time, going back in? 11 years.
Cork people are incredibly good. They were so good to me, but yeah, I'm glad that I don't have to go drinking with tons of Cork people this month. I'll admit that.
Yeah, as a Kerry man, like the banter between Kerry and Cork as well is just, it's unbelievable. Yeah, they're a lot of fun. I'm curious, bit of a big question, and feel free to answer it in any direction you want, but you obviously so big in terms of the hurling aspect. You're like incredibly successful regarding your studies and your career. But if I were to ask you now, or even as when you get older, like, how do you want to be remembered? Maybe both as a hurler or just in general?
I think I'm not sure how to answer this, but I think I wouldn't have wanted to end my career, because when you stop playing hurling, you stop being that relevant in the like public eye, which is totally fine. Just everybody's working. So you're just not a person that's working. So I had until I finished my career to break the idea that I was just that person who scored the goals in 2013, and as if like I didn't have a career that's like I went on for years after that. So that would have been frustrating if I played for 12 years and I was only remembered for what I did in my first year. I think that would have been frustrating. But I kind of, a couple of years ago when I got my first All-Star, I kind of felt like that monkey was off my back in some sense. I was like, John, I had a good year, and I felt like, yeah, I was really happy to get an All-Star. And then after that, I was just like, yeah, John, it kind of broke that a small bit. But before that, I would have been conscious of it, being like, God, I really need to do something one of these years so that I can kind of like have some sort of staggered nature to my career, rather than completely front loading it. But yeah, that's probably my answer. I think I would like to be remembered as, I don't have any grand ambitions for being like, oh, whatever, just like a player that contributed to the cause enough to bring two of Clare's 5 All-Irelands back. Like that is absolutely, even saying it, I feel great by saying that. And I think that's what I would like to be remembered for.
Yeah, it does. It even sounds good when you say it. And like, fingers crossed, this isn't the end. You'll be able to add a few more numbers onto that. Shane, this was an absolute pleasure. Like, as I said to you in our prep work, like, seriously nervous about this, but absolute delight to talk with you. You know, I'm really, really impressed by how you're such a high achiever in the pitch, and then also in terms of your career as well. And I think you are an inspiration out there to people who aspire to do the same. So thanks so much for coming on and having the discussion today.
Yeah, I really appreciate your kind words, Padge, and thanks for having me on. It's been great chatting to you. Really enjoyed it.
All right. Take care. We'll chat to you soon. Take care, folks.